Thank you very much, Mas Joni, for the introduction. It is always good to be around orang Indonesia, even though I have to speak English because at least everybody just knows how to pronounce my name. My name is Imandi Andiasana, not Aimed Andiasana. Sometimes people just pronounce that way. So thank you, Mas Joni, for pronouncing it correctly because it was not you who made me. I'm like that. Pak Dubes yang saya hormati, Pak Atasa, this is a great honor for me to be here to present. It's a bit awkward because the poles are here, so I have to be standing, like moving here. Check. Yeah. It's good to see friends from around the world, and I've known some of them, some of you, and some of them are also friends in Facebook only. So it's glad to have met you, Mas Adit, for example. Today I'd like to present to you a paper. It's about the impact of climate change, or global warming, or in this case it's sea level rise, to the way a country like Indonesia may or may not change the size of its maritime areas. So in a more dramatical language, I asked whether or not this climate change may sink sovereignty or sovereign rights. Benarkah climate change ini menenggelamkan kedaulatan? Even though this morning I think again about the climate change and global warming. I'm from Australia, which is now summer, and today is -3 here. What warming are we talking about? So it's not warming at all for me, so it's actually cold. But yes, I'll try to talk about introduction a little bit and then briefly about the climate change. And the focus will be how a country can claim maritime area based on the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and then the case of Indonesia and the impact of climate change. I'll focus also on the options that are available on how a country deal with this issue, and then I'll end the presentation with concluding remarks. Climate change, I'm not pretending to be an expert in this case, but I believe that you are all agree that climate change is actually an open-ending debate. It is actually contested debate, the rate, the cause, and everything. Some even do not believe that the climate change exists. But one thing for sure that there are reports that we can trust in this case, in my opinion. The IPCC, for example, reveals that sea level rise as the impact of climate change is around 38 to 59 centimeters by the end of the century. It can certainly be debated because if you read different sources, you can have different figures also. So the question about how much and how quick, it is still there. And also, we talk about the land submergence. Climate change can certainly be blamed, but one thing that we also need to consider is land subsidence. So it is only not the water that is rising up, but the land is also going down, which is land subsidence, we call it. But no matter what, one thing for sure is that can change the coastline, which eventually will change the baseline, and eventually it can, or it may, at least change the maritime limits. So this is what we are going to talk about now. I'd like to remind you a little bit about how a country can claim maritime area based on the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This is the water, and this is what we call a baseline, and then internal waters over there. From that baseline, we can claim 12 nautical miles of territorial sea, and then contiguous zone, EEZ. I think you have to remind what we have learned in high school. And then continental south over there, we have high seas or laut bebas, and then the area. The area of this illustration is actually to tell you that a country can claim a very large maritime area based on United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The second one is which area is considered as kedaulatan or sovereignty, and which area is considered as hak berdaulat. Why these are important? Because in kedaulatan or in sovereignty, a country can have a full control, while in hak berdaulat, it can only utilize resources. So it is very important to understand this. It also comes in 3D, like movies. So this is the baseline, and then this is what territorial sea, exclusive economic zone, and also continental shelf. I know what you're thinking, cara bikinnya gimana ya? Yes, Mas Yun? I think this explains quite clearly what happens, because we know that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So animation is even more, I think, than 1,000 words. So this is how a country can claim its maritime area by what we call it in law of the sea is envelope of arts. Okay, it was the theoretical framework, and now we look at Indonesia. Indonesia does not claim its maritime area from its each island, but from a baseline system we call an archipelagic baseline. So Indonesia, as an archipelagic state, can designate a baseline system connecting the outer point of outer islands. So now we can understand how important outer islands are for Indonesia, the small islands. So Indonesia can then define or can claim territorial sea, EEZ, and continental shelf from this baseline. This is, for example, a territorial sea that Indonesia can claim. So all the waters inside this system is called archipelagic waters, which belong to Indonesia. And then from there, Indonesia can define the boundaries and also its EEZ. So if look at here, for example, we have a lot of small islands over there. So what happens if the small islands are sinking because of the climate change? So it will eventually will change the configuration of the baseline, which eventually can change the potential maritime areas that Indonesia can claim. This is what we can see from the media. 2.000 pulau Indonesia bakal tenggelam, 2.000 pulau Indonesia lenyap, 2.000 pulau Indonesia terancam tenggelam pada tahun 2030. Is it true? I mean, what happened if this is really true? We can talk about this later on. Now that was the framework, the theory. Now what are the impacts of climate change? First, it can affect the status of small islands. It threatens small islands. Okay, this is the illustration. We know that the sea surface does not stay still. It moves. It's what we call the low tide and then high tide. This is really important because in the definition of Law of the Sea Convention, this is what we call an island, and this is a low tide elevation. So island and low tide elevation over here. So something that appear only during low tide is called low tide elevation, but islands have to be appear all the time, even during high tide. So that's the definition of why this is important. This is, for example, because of the global warming, for example, the low tide is rising, and then this particular object is no longer low tide elevation. Why is it important? This is the illustration. So, for example, there is no island over here, no small island, no low tide elevation. So this is the outer limits of territorial sea that the country can claim. But what happens if there are 4 low tide elevation over there? So only this problem with the animation. This is not my fault actually. Blame it to Mas Yun. So these 2 islands, these 2 low tide elevation can add the claim to that particular territorial sea. So it means that this is now the entire territorial sea that this country can claim because of the existence of this low tide elevation. So can you imagine if these 3 low tide elevation now disappear because of climate change? And then this is the new, oh thank God it works. The new limit that that country can claim. So it is significantly smaller than what it can claim previously. The second impact is the ambulatory baseline and shifting maritime limits. This is, I think we know this already from the previous slide. This is how a country can claim its maritime area. But if for some reason this land is larger, for example because of the reclamation, this is the potential maritime limits that it can claim, which is larger. But what happens if, because of sea level rise, it is shrinking, and then the new limits is now here. You can see the potential loss of maritime area. How about the yet to be the established maritime boundaries? Because Indonesia has 10 neighbors, and we have to establish maritime boundaries with India, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, Philippines, Palau, PNG, Australia, and Timor-Leste. So this is one of the methods how, sorry it's a bit technical here, but I just want to make it a little bit quick here. This is just to demonstrate how boundary lines are generated using a critical point established or defined along the coastline. So you can see here that this particular point along the coast are really important in defining the boundaries between two countries. So it means that the position of coastline are really important, and then it means that sea level rise will eventually define how a country can define or can delineate boundaries with its neighbors. Now, how about the already established boundaries? For example, state A and state B already established boundaries. Because of some reason, for example, the state B is decreasing in size because of the sea level rise. Will this line shift it? It is a no. Why no? We can talk about this later on. And the third is the impact is also uneven. We agree already, or we know already, that the change of baseline can potentially change the maritime limits. But what about this case now? We can see that these three base points here did not really contribute to the definition of the outer limits of maritime area. So it means that if something happened around this particular part of the coast, it will not really change the outer limits of maritime area. Now, enough with the impacts. It can go on and on, but we can now talk about the option that is available, what a country can do to respond to that particular impacts. I propose two options here: to fix the baseline or to fix the maritime limits. First, fixing the baseline legally. So, for example, this is a land with a baseline in here. So this is the outer limits of maritime claim that it can claim. Theoretically, the change of baseline will eventually change also the outer limits of maritime claim. To anticipate this, we can fix actually the baseline. So if the baseline is fixed and then it does not move, so it means that the outer limits does not move either. This is actually supported by the fact that according to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, baselines are the one depicted on a chart. So we talk about baseline is the one that is on the chart, not the one in reality. So it doesn't matter what happens in reality, as long as you do not change your chart, the baseline is still there. Even though there will be another issue, if we do not update our chart, it will be an issue with the navigation, for example, because the current chart does not really represent the current situation in the coastal area. This is, for example, what Japan has been doing. Fixing baseline, meaning fixing the location of an island. This is the small island called Okinotorishima. So in order to fix this baseline of this from this small island, Japan built actually the coastal protection, like almost 360 degrees, protecting that particular small island. So then from that small island, Japan can make a very large claim of maritime area. Of course, this is certainly costly. Are we rich enough to do this? Or in terms of environment, I believe that it is not an environmentally friendly approach. The second one, not fixing the baseline, but fixing the limit. So if we fix the limit like this, it doesn't matter what happened to the land, the limit is still there. And this approach is actually not a new approach, because to the continental shelf, this has been applied actually. But the question is now, can it be applicable to other zones like territorial sea and EEZ? Now the challenge. That was the proposal, but the thing is, it hasn't been covered. It hasn't been governed by United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So the challenge will be how Indonesia, a country like Indonesia, will propose this as part of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. If we do it unilaterally, it is possible, but the question is whether other countries will recognize our fixed limit or fixed baseline. And another question is, it can be done domestically quite easily, but will other countries still recognize? Because it will eventually affect how Indonesia or like other countries will comply to the international law. Or the other approach or possibility is, can we amend the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea? Let's change it, change the provision so it can be adopted, for example. But personally, I don't really see that the world is ready to negotiate for another United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, because even the current one was negotiated for 9 years. And then the other proposal is actually not changing the convention, but adding new agreement. Like what we have done in 1998, for example. The world agreed to add more agreement on fish stock. So adding new part without changing the old convention. So I'll show you this one more time about this picture, because at the beginning, in my impression that it is nice to be here, it is nice to have a holiday in this island. But now, after knowing all the climate change and global warming, we might change our mind. So yes, actually, climate change can theoretically sink the sovereignty or sovereign rights. But the thing is, we have the option to fix the baseline or maritime limits that I've already talked about. The issue is now to have maritime area or maritime limits are actually the rights of all coastal states. So fixing that actually not a crime, not excessive. So it is actually confirming what coastal states are already entitled to. I think that's all my presentation. I'd like to present my acknowledgement or my grateful to my university, Gajah Mada University, and then Wollongong. I'm studying now in Wollongong is, by the way, in Australia. It sounds like in Hong Kong, but no. Sounds like that. And of course the AusAid, because I'm sponsored by AusAid. And of course the most important thing is the Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia in Canberra, and also KJRI, because I'm here because they will be paid for my ticket. So thank you, Mas Yoni, for the letter that you sent. And one more thing also, thank you for everybody, Mas Yoni, who organized this. And Ayu, I have my sister back there and providing me with free accommodation during my stay in Bali. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you.
Yes, of course. You have to. Please take a seat. And if you want to enjoy. So, thank you very much for Imadi and the Asana for the very constructive, and I learned a lot now about the climate change effect to the sovereignty. It's very impressive. And now time for answer and questions. Any questions or comments?
Good morning, I'm Tikam from Holland. I'm not a scientist, I'm a very humble doctor. I'm from Holland. Holland made lands. God made the world, Holland made lands. How about that, for the boundaries? If a country makes extra land, how is the rule about that?
Thank you so much, Pak Tikam, for your very nice question. I highlighted a little bit about what happens to two countries if they have already established boundaries. So it is clear the boundary that is already established will not change. It is based on the convention of the Vienna Convention in 1969 and 1978, so it's clear. However, if you talk about unilaterally claimed boundaries or limits, if you imagine Indonesian map, for example, Java Island To the south, we have no neighbors, meaning that we can define the outer limits of maritime zone unilaterally. In this case, if we manage to reclaim Java, for example, yes, theoretically it is possible for Indonesia to extend its maritime limits because of the, based on Article 11 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It says that if the reclamation is part of the form the integral part of the coastline, it can be considered as baseline, which means it can be considered as the new reference to measure the limits of maritime zone. I hope it answered you. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Boleh tanya? Samsi Satar dari Jakarta. We learned from the past that a few islands we lost to Malaysia actually, right? And so in this case, what happened in your view? Why? Why Malaysia always claim the islands near Indonesia? I think in the last, Natuna also, they are now trying to claim Natuna, is part of even maybe Vietnam. So can you explain about it? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak. We have our Excellency Ambassador here, so please correct me, Pak, if I answer this incorrectly. This is certainly political to an extent, but I will not really touch that area. I'll try to talk about this in a technical and a little bit of legal perspective, Pak. Indonesia has never lost any island. Kenapa? Indonesia does not lose Sipadan and Ligitan, for example. Why? Because Indonesia never owned it. Indonesia never owns that two islands. So this is what happened. In 1960s, when Indonesia tried to define borders with Malaysia, Indonesia and Malaysia discovered two islands called Sipadan and Ligitan. So in international law, we know the principles called uti possidetis juris, meaning the area or boundaries of countries is actually inherited from the colonial part, which is we call it a predecessor. Jadi wilayah suatu negara atau batas wilayah suatu negara itu mengikuti penjajahnya. Meaning, Indonesia and Malaysia had to really prove if these two islands belong to British or Netherlands. If it belong to British, and it is automatically belong to Malaysia, right? If it were with the Netherlands, and it automatically belongs to Indonesia. But the fact is, there is no evidence saying that it was the two islands were part of either British or Netherlands. And then because of the two islands were called terra nullius in the terms of international law. Terra nullius means ownerless, tidak ada yang punya. So it is then the right of Indonesia and Malaysia to claim, right? Ya seperti kita nemuin dompet di jalan gitu berdua kan, coba punya saya gitu ya. Try to claim by providing a lot of evidence. For example, Sipadan Ligitan, according to Indonesia perspective, were part of Bulungan Sultanate, for example. And because Bulungan is not part of Kalimantan, so those islands should be with Indonesia. But Malaysia came also with another evidence that those two islands were actually managed or something like that by Kesultanan Sulu. And because Sulu is not part of Sabah and Sarawak, and then blah 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 and so on and so forth. So we talk about sovereignty, we talk about history actually. Now the question is, whose history are we talking about? Why don't we go back to the Majapahit thing and Sriwijaya, for example? Because all of those areas are in one particular country or power. So if we can claim to be part of Majapahit, for example, why cannot they claim the same? Because as we believe that they also part of misalnya. So back to that very good question. So Indonesia, in my opinion, or in the legal perspective, does not really lose an island. So we try to claim the ownerless island, but we failed. So the right term is Indonesia does not lose, but fail to add two more islands. Thank you so much.
One last question, maybe? Okay, two last questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ani. It is a very interesting presentation of you. I think would like to pose this question with regards to from your point of view, is it really necessary for Indonesia to make like so-called as a trilateral agreements with the ASEAN countries, for example, because of for example, in the near Sulawesi and as well as Filipina, there are like a common maritime jurisdiction which should involve like cooperation with another Asian countries. So if Indonesia only take unilateral perspective to set the border maritime jurisdiction, it is not beneficial for the purpose of the ASEAN countries.
Terima kasih, Mas Dian. Yes, Indonesia needs to settle boundaries with other countries. This is for sure. Like what I mentioned earlier, if you talk about the borders or limits to the south of Java, of course we do not really need any bilateral agreements because we don't have any neighbors over there. But in the Sulawesi, for example, yes, not only bilateral, we have to define it trilaterally. Trilaterally because there are Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines on the other side. So there will be a point. If you can imagine. Sorry, I can't really show my map over here. If you don't mind, Mas Joni, it will be great. There will be a point in South Sulawesi that has to be agreed not only by Indonesia and Malaysia, but also with Malaysia and Philippines, and also, yes. Okay, this is the map that I can point out, for example, this line, of course, from Indonesia and Philippines here, right? So this line has to be agreed by Indonesia and the Philippines. But this particular part is the business of Indonesia and Malaysia. So there will be a point in here, which is the meeting point of the three countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. So, okay, what does this line mean? Sorry. This dashed line means. This is actually a unilaterally claimed line from Indonesia. So, this line is not the one agreed yet by Indonesia and Palau, for example. So, but this is the Indonesian position. So, yes, I agree with, I try to answer it very shortly that yes, Indonesia needs to agree the boundaries, not only bilaterally, but also trilaterally.
Thank you very much. I think we have to move now to the second talk.